Okay, we are live.
We are live.
We are live. It's Brent Leary. First, a few good minutes of this week, and it's going to be a really good few minutes. Not just good, but really good, because I get a chance to talk to. I can see how long have I known you? At least a decade, right?
I'm going to go back and say 2008.
2000. That sounds good.
Yeah,
So we're going on 14 years,
you
man.
got it, man. It's been a long time,
Samir,
and boy, have we seen some twists and turns along the way.
especially you like the twists and turns. You actually like the pretzel logic, right? Do you still like the pretzel
I
logic?
still like the pretzel logic. I'm dusting the cobwebs off the blog editor, and I'm getting back in the game. So
Oh, there it is. Samir Patel. Now, when I met him, he was merely a thought leader, an industry expert, and all those things, pretzel logic. Then you ended up going to SAP for a while.
success factors. Yeah, yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
A little thing called Jam you were into at the time. Then you moved
Yeah.
over, became CEO of Kahuna. And that's like the last time we actually did one of these kind of conversations. And that's been like what, 4 or 5 years at least?
Yeah. I mean, we haven't done a show like this. Oh well,
You were on, were you on the players?
players. Yeah, I think the
That's
players.
it.
I can't remember when the players happened, but I was on the players, and we. I remember we. Yeah, it was just one of the sort of state of CX, and obviously I
Oh
was
yeah,
looking at it from a Martech lens back then, given where I was focused on the Kahuna days, right?
absolutely.
But before that, I think the audience needs to know that you, me, and a bunch of us might have that world record of on cross-linking to each other's blog posts and and raising the bar on what the original spirit of blogging was, which is you didn't blog to show how smart you were, you blogged to learn, right?
Absolutely.
And to pull ideas and to grow ideas and to build on it. And the comments were way more interesting than the original blog post, and that meant success, right? Because people chimed in with
Absolutely.
different opinion and debates. Um,
Lots of debates.
Lots of debates, right? And we all sort of, lifted the industry of CRM together, which is something that nobody can take away from us. It's pretty cool.
Hey Sven, good to see you. Yeah, is that your nickname or something?
Not mine.
It's been putting something out there that we didn't know.
Well, he's added intrigue to the conversation. So
All right, but now you're back at SAP. You've been there what, about a year?
yeah, over a year. But in this role for a couple of months. But yes, back
Okay.
at SAP, over a year ago. Yeah.
And of course, you're back as the chief marketing officer. It's actually chief marketing and solutions officer. Is that the official?
That's the official title. Yeah.
For SAP CX.
Doesn't fit in your in the word.
I know. Got to cut it off there, man.
Yeah.
But one thing before we get really rolling, one thing I think is kind of new because I don't remember you rocking the vest before your
Kahuna was the big switch for some reason, and I cannot tell you it was planned. This was something that just became. Oh, it was an event that I was going to go keynote, and my team was like, hey, we had this tradition, I guess, of where when you had your 1 year vesting of your stock, you got a vest. That was sort of the thing. And they were like, you haven't been here a year, but you got an event coming, and you got to go speak. And so we like rushed to get it printed on the vest. And then I just became a vest guy, and I have I have more vests than my wife has shoes, I think.
Yeah, you know what? But in your honor, see what I'm rocking?
I saw that. I didn't miss that, dude. I didn't miss that.
But you know what? I think there's somebody else that got your idea of vesting. Let me see if I can put this up here. I hope I can. Oh, this picture doesn't seem to be working. All of a sudden, I had this. Oh, I know what's going on. And I got to do. Okay, let's see if this happens now. Come on. Oh, see, I had this great picture all lined up for you, and it's not working because I think Jeff Bezos got your vest idea from you.
Did he? Okay, we will run with that. Why don't we just assume that that is the case, and I'll take the win on that. We can move on.
Okay. Oh well. All right. You're a CMO. You're a longtime CX person. We've been through an interesting last 2 years with the pandemic. In your estimation, what's been the biggest change, maybe the biggest issue over the last 2 years with this pandemic from a CX perspective and from your perspective as a chief marketing officer at a huge company like SAP?
Yeah. I think there's two big sort of buckets of implications, right? The first bucket is what has the impact of the pandemic been on the operational side, right? And then the second one is on the strategic and the growth side, right? So on the operational side, 100% of the the breaks in e-commerce, right, as we move to get more digital. Not 90, not 95, 100% of the reasons why e-commerce sort of fell to its knees when we got hit by the pandemic in early March, right, of last year, was not because a shopping cart failed and not because a catalog didn't reload. It was all because of supply chains. Mm-hmm. And so I think that as a CX leader, the vendor landscape, to be honest, has sort of almost engineered the view of CX to be limited to the edge set of technologies, right? Your CRM systems, your marketing tech, what we call CX, right? The stack. When in reality, I will say that for you and me as consumers, 95% of the time had a bad experience. It was related a lot more to lower inventory. It was related to my stuff didn't show up on time. It was related to very tedious returns management processes and reverse logistics. And so I think it's just put into sharp focus, right? The need for real, true grown-up CX to not have a vendor-centric view of the technologies that are powered and that are in the house, in the CX building, if you will, but to have the added responsibility as a CX leader now to say, listen, I don't own supply chain inside my siloed organization, but my 55, 60, 70% of my customer experience issues are coming from things outside of the traditional CX bucket. So how am I resetting to absorb that, right? And truly, what is the interplays between my entire technology stack from demand chain to supply chain look like? What are those interconnections that don't make me fall flat on my face the next time there's an issue for some other reason? Hopefully it's not a pandemic. Yeah. So I think that there is a complete entire reset from an operational flow standpoint on how CX leaders are going to have to start to think about it. And it's daunting, to be honest, right? Because it's been very easy to sit at the edge and just keep tooling my customer service app and my e-commerce app. Those are CRM programmatic goals. They're not CX goals, right? If it's CX, it's going to have to go there. So I think that's a big, and we can double click on these and I can say many more things. But I think that's a really good sort of operational efficiency fallout lesson learned. Yeah,
absolutely. And sorry for the dings. All of a sudden, I'm getting all these messages coming in, and some of them from our mutual buddy Paul Greenberg.
Of course,
you should know I'm in the middle of something here.
Just get on LinkedIn, dude.
Hopefully, it'll be done soon.
That's right.
But anyway,
so first one, and then we can talk about that, and I can get into the growth side in a minute. However, you'd like to go.
Go for it.
Yeah. Well, I think the second one is growth, right? And so I think that, when I study, and I don't believe this was created by the pandemic, but I think it's been an undertone for a long time that just never came to the surface, right? Which is what has also happened through the pandemic is that, businesses, traditional B2B businesses, right, that never dreamed of ever doing anything outside of B2B because they had these big supplier distribution, blah, 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 now said, hey, listen, we can't wait here because of all the different, because of the crunch that we have, and we've got to flip, or not flip, but actually augment with D2C and direct to consumer models, right? So this notion of complete mindset change, culture change in terms of how I do business, going from being a 200-year-old, very traditional industry B2B company, saying I need to figure out direct to consumer. Oh, and then by the way, I need to also learn how to coexist with these distributors that I've had relationships with for 200 years and break the bad news to them that I'm actually going to be in market with them too. But we just have to adjust to this, right? With the advent of e-commerce going up as much as it did and becoming more of the primary channel, especially if you're in retail, then you're also starting to say, okay, how am I growing my inventory lineup? How am I entering new countries? How am I going into regions where there are massive local implications because I need to rely much heavier on digital channels, right? What the opportunity there then for CX leaders, and this is something that we think really, really hard about, and at least for me and my playbooks from my jam days, so how I look at sort of next spurts in technology innovation, right? Is CX has this opportunity to not become the reactive mechanism for a CEO or a board saying, hey, we want to enter a new market aggressively, or we want to go from selling socks to selling shoes, but actually be at the table to be the primary growth driver, not just I'm one of your tools and tactics to do it, right? And the missing link that is getting exposed now, frankly, in this conversation around CX is that in the last 5 years, as we sort of move from CRM to CX, while we saw a lot of benefit because we stopped thinking about systems and record keeping, right? We put the customer in the center of the experience. The only problem is that we tilted so far that we forgot about becoming the growth drivers and then adopting some of the more financial hardcore metrics versus just how much, engagement metrics, these very programmatic CX metrics, right? Which are no doubt important to keep your customer happy, but how are you becoming the primary driver of top line and bottom line? And we're not having that adult conversation around CX, and it's time for that to become a real conversation, right? So while we would love to talk about, engagement metrics that have been born out of the CX conversation, I could guarantee you, and I've said this and I've written about this, right? Like if I saw Julia, who's our board member, who runs all of CX, runs all of marketing, or Christian Klein, our CEO, no doubt he wants to know if we're keeping our customers engaged. No doubt he wants to know if they're happy, but he's going to be like, where's my leads? Where's my growth? And why are you spending so much money? And CX needs to sort of start to look at technology as an enabler to those very real business metrics that go into annual reports now, right? Not be the afterthought. So how are we rising up as an industry now? And by the way, the pandemic, like I said, didn't invent these things. The pandemic accelerated the need for these kinds of conversations. Right. But I don't want to it's not a negative poo-poo spin on it, right? That like we haven't done it. It's more about, if I'm a CX leader, this is a lifetime opportunity now for me to start to really own business metrics, not respond to them, not become not have them handed down to me, to get out in front and say, we're going to use CX as the revenue growth driver to expand our footprint in markets and segments and what have you. So I think we're going to see the repercussions of all these things that I just talked about for a very long time. And then the last one, which I think is quite funny in my opinion, right? It's like I wrote this in the blog post. I was like, why did it take a pandemic for me to realize that buying toilet paper via subscription is a good idea, right? So we saw some behavior change that came out of the pandemic, which will stick as well, right? And how we're absorbing those. So I think to me, that's the framework that we look at when we try to make technology choices and decisions about, what our customers going to want and expect out of CX for the next 5-6 years. And I won't get into the whole SAP pitch thing, but if you think about the fact that we power the entire demand and supply chain, it's a pretty awesome, sort of evolution of CX that puts us right in pole position to help customers take it on.
When you think about everything you just said, makes complete and total sense. One thing.
Okay, we can end now. We can end.
Not yet. But what about when you ask the company and the different people who own CX? Has the answer changed from them? Do they try to pawn it off to one group, or are they gravitating towards owning up to, yeah, we are a piece of this, even if we're not viewed or we don't have direct interaction, what we do with supply chain and logistics is just as important as somebody on the front end of the interaction?
It's an awesome question, and this is why I love you, because you'll always go one level deeper. I think that's a super important point. Well, I think again, the cop-out answer would be it's a cultural thing. Some companies will absorb it and embrace it, over others. I think there's different dimensions here, right? Like, I think first is, forget the whole company. Like, let's look inside CX as well, right? Like CX, I mean, the stack that we call CX is pretty siloed, as much as the industry would like to tell you that it all hums nicely, right? I think that we're at a point right now where if you tease back what I said around the operational efficiency piece, and you look at the growth drivers, right? This is now a board level discussion, and it's not about the CX leader reaching over the aisle to go into the supply chain person and saying, "Hey, let me explain this to you." I mean, some of that happens too, and I think in collaborative organizations they can understand it, right? But I think it puts the CIO and the CEO back in the seat to say, we might be two of very few people with the C title to help educate, explain the ramifications of doing and not doing, and then execute, right? So, do I think that the pendulum swings and the CIO becomes the buyer of CX? No, I think that CX does what CX does, but for something like I described to come true, you see how the CIO is going to be able to be very, very knowledgeable, informative, influential, right? To sort of start to bring these pieces together. I also think that, I'm not a fan generally. I've never been a fan of, this is not about a 5-7 year project to get everything beautifully stitched together. That those become engineering projects. They're not business projects, right? The business project is, when I'm trying to drive this experience, for example, let's take the call center, for example, right? Your customer service area, right? You want to near and dear to your heart, right? An area you know well. This isn't about, until I get my supply chain connected to my ERP, connected to my this, connected to my that, like until it's all done, like I can't move. No, it's not. It's about where is that point of customer differentiation and the data you need to be able to support the customer from the customer's viewpoint, right? And to be honest, again, a conversation people don't like to have is from the company's viewpoints, right? What are those engagement touch points, which is also the best place for me to be able to educate the customer on other products and services that we have that they may want to buy, right? So the traditional notion of service in that sense, when you start to intelligently connect, your customer data platform, and I know you want to talk about that separately in a bit, but
going right where I want to go.
And you look at connecting your marketing systems that are doing personalization and actually helping you engage correctly and in a pointed way with the customer. This notion of thinking about service happening just within the confines of the 6.7 features that your service application provides is the problem, right? But these intelligent connections between 2 or 3 systems can give you 70-80% return, right? And so when we think about it, at least from our standpoint, that's how we think about process transformation, right? Process transformation is not an engineering project; it's a process transformation project, and it requires sometimes one application just with some clever data next to it. Sometimes it's 2 applications coming together. How are we allowing customers to kind of go in that direction? So I think these are both the examples I gave you about this, bringing a CIO to help facilitate this, or a CEO, or having these very tight line of business functional conversations are much easier to tackle than we've got to wait for to build a Taj Mahal of technology over the next 10 years, right? So I think that's how customers will move fast with accuracy, and they'll see results.
Let's talk about the 3 letters you mentioned, CDP. It's been around. It's been around for a while.
Yeah.
It's been, some people are like, is this really something, or is it just some marketing speak? I think we've gotten past that point now.
Yeah.
But what about
I don't know yet.
role?
I don't know yet.
Oh, you don't think so?
No.
You still think people are
I didn't mean to cut
apprehensive?
No,
go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Go ahead. Well, no, I mean, I think okay, I'm just gonna be Samir here, and you've known me for a while, right? Like I mean, I think 90% of
Nobody
you
else
know.
is here, man.
Yeah,
Nobody
it's
else
just
is
you and me.
listening. Just you and me.
It's you and me in your living room. That's right. No, I think honestly, it is marketing speak for the most part, right? Like I think and I say that because I think it is the first generation, if you will, of what we saw with customer data platform. Again, has been a very convenient vendor-led narrative on what a true customer data platform entails. And it has largely been based on the availability of easier to access public data put into one place to make sense of the customer, right? And again, it's limited for the most part to edge data about that particular customer, right? And so I think that that's made it really, really difficult, frankly, because that's where the customers have not really had this aha moment, right? About and we haven't seen customer data platforms take off at scale, right?
Or were
Um,
they even just confused? We already got CRM. What the
yeah,
hell do I need?
yeah,
Whatever this thing is,
yeah,
when I've got CRM.
right. There's that too, right? Because the truth is that there are tiny slivers of what a CDP does that are inherently core functionality of different applications already, right? So you
Right.
immediately say like, why do I need a CDP? My CRM system, if it's a B2B example, for example, right? Like my CRM system already has all the data, right? Because I think again it's been limited by the current vendor landscape that has been at more a bit, sort of the forefront of the stuff, right? They've inherently, if you look back at who that is, these have been natively CX, CRM at the edge technologies. So the best that those technologies do is take in publicly available data, right? Add that to the data that sits at the edge of the organization and says, voila, CDP. And then then you start hearing, my least favorite term on the planet, not because I have a problem with the term, but because I think it completely oversells or undersells, right? Is this notion again of customer 360, right? And again, it's 360 in your convenient sort of like a circle of the universe, right? That says it's 360, but I define 360 as these data sources. Well, we call it enterprise grade CDP, right? Like, what is enterprise grade CDP? If you want to really sort of take the shackles off of these vendor defined landscapes, well, let's go back to many of the things I said earlier, right? Let's put Brent the consumer in the middle of this conversation, right? I can say shortly that a decently complete profile about Brent is his public breadcrumbs plus what he's bought from me before if I'm a retailer, and right. But if you want to talk grown-up CDP, right, and if that's 360, then I'm going to be like, dude, then I'm thinking 720 because this 360 doesn't sound like 360 to me, right? Or you call that 180 and I'll talk 360. But to me, a true sort of complete data, forgetting the numbers for a second, includes not just the publicly available data, not the data that sits on the edge in your edge applications, right? But it is about the data coming out of returns management. It's the data coming out of reverse logistics. It's the data coming out that's connecting personalization with not any product, but what's in inventory right now, or what am I trying to push today? Today the whole returns management process is every retailer's nightmare. I mean,
That's where I
margins were
think,
thin anyway, right? And
yeah,
now Brent's returning 4 hats for every one he keeps, dude. Like, that crushes my margins,
right.
right? So you want to talk grown-up CDP? I can stay here. I can put on a teapot and we can be here for the rest of the day, right? But I think that there is we're entering a much the next phase for it to see velocity like you're describing, where some of the skepticism goes away and people start to truly understand it, is when we again remove these very inconvenient truths for a bit, right? That
Yeah.
the richness of the data is going to sell the promise of CDP, not the convenience of access to it, which is at the edge. Does that make sense?
And I love the term grown up CDP. How many companies do you think are really ready for grown-up CDP,
So I think more than you would think, right? I think it's they may not, many of them may not have landed the plane on I need a CDP, but what I can tell you that they're all thinking about is I need something that does this. They may not all know that, well, that's what you need from a real kind of CDP, because when they think of like I need something solved like this, and then they see what the typical narrative in the market, in the press, and the media is around CDP, they're like, that doesn't solve this problem I'm trying to solve. So that's not the answer, right? I think the second thing too is that over time, the consumer of CDP data is not going to only be CX. And that's a conversation we're not having either, right? If you take everything that we're connecting in this enterprise or this grown-up CDP that I described, forget the CX professional, CX leader, CX practitioner. There is tremendous value in all this data to the head of procurement and supply chain. Like, what are customers saying, right? Like, I can pick 3 components for a product I'm building. What am I learning about the ones that get picked, that don't get picked, instead of waiting for this latency in data that we have today for it to reach from the front office way to the back office? It's like, I don't need latency. I don't need a quarterly report from you. I don't need that weekly status meeting. I can just look at it and I know. And I can make choices and I move really, really fast, right? So the consumer of CDP data, when it's grown up, is also going to expand from the traditional consumer of it today.
Are you still seeing then a more marketer-centric approach to CDP, as opposed to, man, there's interactions going on in social, there are transactions going on between the customer and the vendor, or maybe there's also the retailer perspective that has to bring the stuff in. There are so many different kinds of digital interactions coming from different perspectives of interacting with the customer. Are you seeing a holistic approach, or are you still seeing it kind of led from the marketer perspective?
I think there's 3 concentric circles, right? So I think there's sort of like individual line of business need for a CDP, right? I'm marketing, I'm this and that. Then there's CX wide, and then there's company wide. So I think you'll see those sort of 3 transitions that happen, right? I do think that there's a lot. So like I said, the marketing department or the CX department has understood the problem and knows that there's a solution that exists for it, which is called CDP. Yeah. I think the broader organization understands the problem. It's a bigger problem than even the marketeer looks at, or not a bigger problem, it's a bigger opportunity than the marketeer looks at, because they can use data in different ways. I don't think that they have seen a version that applies to them as that solution, right? And I'll throw other things we didn't even talk about before, right? So like we talk about, again, in the spirit of grown-up CDPs, right? So here's another inconvenient thing that you won't hear generally in the vendor narrative or the market narrative around this, which is consent and identity, right? When again, not plugging SAP, but I will, but like, in our products in my portfolio, like with our CDP comes, 3.2 billion identities and 10 million consent preferences in there. 11 billion actually now, right?
Wow.
So part of the grown-up narrative is not just the different data sources you can ingest into a CDP to make it richer. It's also the other really important pieces. Can you engage respectfully and within the preferences of each consumer? And again, those have been very disparate conversations. So when we look at it, right, we're like, okay, the ability for us to get data into a CDP, because we power the demand and supply chain, pretty damn good. Gigya, right? SAP Gigya, which is our product, brings deep expertise on the identity. That was the core of that business before they got into we started building CDP products. So it's in our DNA to be like, you build stuff in here, you make sure that the opt-in preferences and you're respecting the consumer, and it's done with that as a design preference versus an afterthought of I brought somebody else's data preference thing. No, it's core to what the guts and the plumbing of our CDP is, right? And so you start to, I was like, I was telling, this just came out of my mouth and it kind of stuck right there. I was talking to Julia, our board member who runs this, right, who I work for. And, it was just like, well, it's, how do you turn compliance into a competitive advantage, right? Compliance has always been the thing that slows you down. But if you've got compliance and identity and GDPR and GDPR-like, mechanisms baked in for different countries into the CDP, you can actually enter and dominate regulated markets a lot faster than your competition because you've got all that baked in, and it's not an afterthought. And I don't need another 2 years to do it, right? Mm-hmm. And as just sometimes something comes out of my mouth, you're like, that was kind of profound. Like, actually, it makes a lot of sense. And so we tested it with customers, and like, yeah, absolutely. Like, we're in Europe. Like every adjacent market we enter has its own nuances around this stuff. And if we didn't need to worry about it because the software had it baked in, then day one interaction with a citizen or a consumer in that country has the stuff incorporated, right? So that's how we think about, we think a lot harder about that space, I think. And again, we have the unfair advantage because, we have that end-to-end, demand display.
Yeah. I love that we went from customer data platform to customer data privacy. What about customer data ethics? Yeah. How do we get folks to not only think CDP and compliance? I talk to a lot of folks. I talk to a lot of vendors.
No, really?
And I ask about privacy, and they start talking security. Mm. Now I know there's some crossover, but I want to talk more on the ethical side of privacy as opposed to the things you really need to do to make sure your data is secure.
Sure.
How, when we get going and you start talking to your customers and about CDP, are they focused on the privacy aspects or more
both?
Kind of focus on? Oh, they are. Okay, talk a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, listen, privacy keeps me out of jail, right? But ethics lets me build longer and deeper customer lifetime value profiles, right? It's good business, right?
Yeah.
So when we go and talk to customers and we say, there's 11 billion consent profiles built in, the ethics come built in that sense, right? These are, how to respect a customer's preferences, desires, opinion, whatever that might be, right? As you're starting to do business with them. And in the long term, you're just going to keep those customers because it sort of fits into what their needs are. So that's one. I think there's another really interesting one to me that, we think a lot harder about here, which, I don't know if this falls really in the formal definition of ethics, right? But is sustainability, right? Mm-hmm. Where it isn't about ethically dealing with the customer, it's respecting the customer's notion of ethics, if you will, on that topic at least, right? And, one of the things that excites me so much about, taking on the sort of CX role and having the privilege to participate in CX for, this sort of, this chapter of my career, right, is that there's 90%, in my opinion, of stuff that's happening around sustainability is happening in the supply chain, right? Like it's happening around where I procure and how I procure. And most customers, it's like their annual or their quarterly business report or their earnings will talk a little about what they're doing in sustainability. And they may have a website where you can go see stuff. But how are you bringing that to the point of purchase? How are we bringing that to the point of preference, to the point of personalization? How is sustainability becoming one critical element of personalization, in a sense, right? Because you're respecting that, I want to see the carbon footprint of my products, or generally when I buy certain products, they better be made with these ingredients or packed in these with this kind of material. I think there's so much more that we can do to be front-footed on this topic of ethics versus just like doing the minimum required so the customer feels good. No, let's double down. Let's lean in on this, right?
That's awesome. I don't know how many vendors are talking about it in that kind of context.
I think that's the way
it needs to go.
When we talk about it a lot, it's, you look at any one of our board members, like sustainability is to us, we say sustainability and profitability is at the same level, right? Like, and until we take the charge and actually put stuff together for customers, it's just happy talk and pretty fonts on a data sheet, right? But so I think really hard, and I'm excited because I think CX can be such a face, be the actual face and the mechanism for a customer to really be able to express what they're doing on this topic in a genuine way, versus hoping you go to their well-designed website to hear 5 things I did somewhere.
Absolutely.
Customers won't mind that.
One last thing.
Yeah, man.
I had a question. No, I had a live stream with David Rabb a couple of weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. CDP himself. And so I was asking him, what were some of the important changes or issues over the last couple of years concerning CDP, and particularly like parts of the CDP technology, the infrastructure. And the thing he came up with was the real-time aspect. Like back when CDP was really getting rolling, there was really no CDP aspect of it. Like being able to take all this data coming in and shoot out a next best action in real time as you're interacting with the customer. Whereas now he's included that as one of the important components of it. How do you see real time and being able to bring all this data together and come up with the next best action or a recommendation while the interaction is taking place?
Yeah. Well, I think 2 things. So first is I love David, and I think I told you this offline. I want to introduce you to Chris O'Hara on our team, who leads all of this and has written 2 books about it. He's a super fun guy. So I'll make that connection. I think you guys will have a blast. I think that I think that's a really, really critical point, because I think that's also one of the things that was slowing down the proliferation of CDP technologies, right? The real-time next best action in the moment. I mean, we have the luxury of having had built a brand new cloud native stack with CDP that is pretty new, right, in the realm of technology. And we've got huge customers using it, but I think that this notion of bringing in that real-time information is doable. With like technology has evolved to a point where it can actually be done right now. So I think that's one data point, which is just a convergence of there's interest in the topic, and the technology has gotten a lot more sophisticated, where it's something that we don't need to throw the first few drafts out because it's here, right? I think that not just the sophistication of the native cloud CDP technology comes into play, which I feel pretty good about from what we have, because it's brand new technology, sophisticated, state of the art. It's built out of Tel Aviv. It's pretty amazing. The important thing to me is a lot of the the conversation around near real time or what have you, where that gets lost is actually in the sophistication of the integrations into the data sources, right? And so when we look at our roadmaps and think about how we get better at this and evolve the product, we definitely take a ton of comfort in knowing that beyond the publicly available data, which is pretty well structured, in many cases, like you can build your catalog, if you will, of bringing those real-time insights in. The difficult stuff, the hard stuff, is actually bringing the pieces of the data that come from the back office, from the supply chain, from ERP, and all of that. And because those teams sit 2 desks away from the people who build that software, the ability for us to troubleshoot and bring that data in real time to drive next best action, right, and to improve the accuracy and the probability of that transaction, whether it's an upsell or it's a personalization moment or what have you, takes a lot of that off the customer's plate, because that's where the real-timeness of the CDP goes away, right? So I sell you a CDP and I'm like, it's real time. And it is real time. What we didn't talk about is that when I want to bring all those other gory data sources in, then what happens? How real time is it? Is it only 20% real time? We try to, as we build these integrated into the product, because both are ours, the ability to kind of it's a little bit like, why do people love an Apple phone, right? It's that whole argument that that Steve Jobs used to have and said, what was it? It was engineered systems, engineered systems where because the hardware and the software is made by the same manufacturer, we have worked our way through. We know the limitations of the chip. Well, we're like that when it's not hardware and software, but it's software and software, right? Like we know how to make these things work, right? And if I have to go to my colleagues who sit on the ERP side and say, hey, listen, one little tweak here that'll allow this to really go real time, well, we can do that because we all work for the same company, right? So I think that this real time discussion is super important. The promise is correct. It's here. The time is here. But as we move into grown up CDP, how much the amount you can hard code or build engineered systems, if you will, is going to take that weight off the customer.
Right.
I'm not going every time you want to integrate something, I'm not going to be like, yeah, use this third-party integration tool, knock yourself out. Like that's not the answer to everything. Right.
Yeah. When you think of the modern digital enterprise or digital, I don't know. I hate using all this stuff, but the modern enterprise.
Yeah.
The components that are going to be important for them to not just survive, but actually thrive going forward, meeting every challenge, meeting expectation as much as it's a moving target.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have CRM, CDP, commerce, and the ability to pull back office information into this equation, along with all these other things.
100%, right? I mean, I don't know, was there a question there? But
it was, is there something else? What else is still missing? It seems like the major components.
I'll tell you what's missing.
Okay.
What's missing is, look, when you look at some of the most sophisticated digitally native mega corporations, right, like the Ubers of the world, born digital, born natively digital. One of the things that will fascinate you about these companies, right, is that it's not about stacks and components. Like if you ask one of these companies to tell you, where did your ERP stop and your CRM start? They can't tell you. They've built it. Like they've built it around the customer experience, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the things that we think really hard about is that instead of having this stack and component and you have this module and you have these feature sets, you have to look at the entire stack of technologies as a toolkit, right? And it has to be stitched together in the context of putting your customer at the center of the process. And so, for those companies that weren't born digitally native, right, but are also competing with them and that is where the market's going, and that's where their headwinds are coming from, right? The way we talk to customers about this is that how are you doing process transformation by looking at the stack that's required here as a toolkit? It may be a CX problem you're solving, but core to that CX problem will be a very clear integration into ERP in a way where as a marketeer or as a customer service rep, when I'm looking at my CRM system, data came in from some other systems to make my process better, right? And that is the view we have to move to, away from, here's a 2x2 table and I'm looking at, let me check some boxes for some features and stacks, right? This is where the innovation in the space will come from going forward versus I've built this one feature better than somebody else. Like that's not how you're going to win against known and unknown threats that we've all seen in the last 10 years come.
So the pandemic forced a lot of organizations to do and think differently, right, because they couldn't do what they've always done, right, and they couldn't just fall back on that. So they had to look and try to do things differently.
And fast. Because suddenly it became a land grab. Right, it became a land grab because it exposed how behind you were on digital, because that became the only channel in certain markets, not for everybody, right?
Right.
And so speed of experimentation, speed of actual making decisions to pivot, speed to incorporate and absorb new business models is side by side. Speed to be able to drop something that seemed like a good idea but didn't have legs. Mm-hmm. That's the groundwork, right? And then the last thing is again scale, right? Like, I need to know that if I grew beyond my wildest expectations in 3 to 5 years from now, I picked the right stack. We don't talk nearly enough about scale. Everybody is so caught up in feature function stuff, right? We don't talk about, can you get me to 100? Do you have the software, the data center capacity, and the scale in your systems to get me to 100 countries? Not the 2 I want to look at this quarter, right? So like, I mean, we have over $1 trillion worth of GMV going through our commerce applications. And so we really study that to understand how is that working, where is that going. Black Friday, we had, I think, a 400+% uptick in sales on Black Friday, 0 downtime, right? So I think these are the kinds of strategic considerations that customers will also start to look at, right? Because if you go to a CEO and you bet the farm on, like, I want to be, back to our earlier conversation, I want to not be the afterthought, I want to be one of the levers to help growth. It's understood that, you're not going to come to me 6 months later and saying, the systems, I wanted to grow and we can, but the systems can't handle it, right? So scale is going to become a really, really important conversation here too, right?
Man, we could talk all day on this stuff.
We could talk all day, dude. We could talk all day.
I know you don't have the time,
Nor do you.
But I really appreciate the time we just had talking about this. I usually ask people at the end of my few good minutes, although, as I said, this is longer than a few good minutes, and there were more than just good minutes. So that's one thing. But I know you're not really a football guy, right?
Not a football guy, dude. I
don't even have to ask you.
I grew up in colonial countries. I'm a big squash player, as you know. But,
that's it. I thought it was either, I know it was either cricket or squash, but it's squash.
It's definitely not cricket, my friend. It's squash. If you are a squash player and the speed at which squash moves, you're generally not a cricket player, and vice versa. Like there's a more, that's a thoughtful, calculated game. This is a boxing match. 15 seconds at a time. I
got to address this guy, the LinkedIn user here, talking about the Bengals. It's guy. I don't even have to guess who it is. It's this guy, Bob Fagel. We're like frenemies. He knows I detest the Patriots, and he knows that I'm a big Rams fan. So that's why he's rooting for the Bengals.
Well, you know what? Our friend Bengals, I will give him this. I lived in Boston for 9 years, and if there was ever a time where I was actually paying attention to football, it was a Patriot friend. So
you're getting ready to ruin this great conversation we had with siding with Bob Fagel. Oh my God. We got to end this now. So we can stay friends.
We were on a roll. We're on a roll. Let's cut it right now. All right. Well, thank you for having me, man. As always.
Man, it was a pleasure. And we definitely have to do this way sooner than 4 or 5 years. That was the last time.
I have a feeling I'll be in your neck of the woods in a couple of months as well. So I'll give you a shot.
Absolutely. All right, man. Okay. Thanks again. And thanks everybody for checking this out.
Thanks, everyone.
I'll see you for the CRM Players on Thursday.